In today's video, we're diving deep into a growing movement in Canada that's sending shockwaves through the economy. Canadians are ditching American products in response to looming US tariffs, and the impact is already being felt across the nation. Today, we'll explore the origins of this movement, examine the economic statistics behind the trade tensions, and break down what the future might hold for Canada, the US, and North America as a whole. Section 1. The growing movement and what sparked it. Canada is in the midst of a full-scale economic standoff with its biggest trading partner, the United States. While political leaders debate tariffs and trade deals, ordinary Canadians have taken matters into their own hands by changing their shopping habits. At the checkout counter, a quiet revolution is unfolding. The tariff threat that sparked it all. Back in January 2025, US President Donald Trump warned that a 25% tariff on Canadian goods was coming, and estimates suggested these tariffs could cost Canada up to $20 billion annually. A study by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce projected that such tariffs might push food prices up by 10% or more, putting enormous pressure on household budgets across Canada. These tariff threats aren't just abstract numbers. They hit home for everyday Canadians who now worry that items like that $5 bottle of olive oil might soon cost $6 or $7. According to Reuters, US President Trump's actions come amid an overall US trade deficit that hit $773 billion in 2023. With deficits with China and Mexico dominating the numbers, but Canada plays a critical role too. The birth of the Buy Canadian movement. The announcement of the tariffs ignited a grassroots Buy Canadian movement. Social media exploded with images of all Canadian grocery hauls, as Canadians proudly switched from US brands to local alternatives. A EMI International's Pulse study showed that 57% of Canadians would choose domestic products if the price difference wasn't too high. Statistics reveal that for the third consecutive year, the combined value of Canada-US trade has exceeded $1 trillion. To put that into perspective, in November 2024 alone, Canada exported $50.4 billion and imported $42.2 billion from the US, resulting in a positive trade balance of $8.1 billion. More strikingly, 71.4% of Canada's total exports go to the US while 50.4% of its imports come from there. This level of integration is why the tariff threat has spurred such a rapid shift in consumer behavior across the country. For everyday Canadians, the movement means rethinking their daily shopping routines. Imagine walking into your local supermarket and hunting for products proudly marked, "Made in Canada." Grocery shopping now demands extra attention, reading labels, comparing brands, and even checking viral Buy Canadian guides. Families may soon adjust their budgets if prices rise due to tariffs, as even routine items might cost 10% more. Local businesses could see an influx of support, while companies dependent on US imports might face higher costs. These changes aren't only about patriotism, they're about protecting an economy where, according to Statistics Canada, US trade accounts for roughly 17.8% of Canadian GDP and supports more than 2.4 million Canadian jobs. Section 2. The backlash and what's at stake. Escalating tensions and economic tug-of-war. The tariff threat by Trump set off a chain reaction, escalating into an all-out trade conflict. Statistics from the US Census Bureau show that while the US runs a significant trade deficit, with deficits of $295.5 billion with China and $171.8 billion with Mexico in 2024, its deficit with Canada is more complex. In goods, the US recorded a $63.3 billion deficit with Canada, however. When excluding oil and gas, the US actually runs a $30 billion surplus with Canada. These numbers highlight the nuanced trade relationship between the two neighbors. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government is preparing retaliatory measures, including imposing 25% tariffs on US goods worth billions of dollars. Reuters reported that Canada's annual merchandise trade surplus with the US was $102.3 billion in 2024. Down slightly from $108.3 billion in 2023, a sign that even high-level trade balances are feeling the strain. Complex supply chains and cross-border integration. Over 75% of Canada's exports are destined for the US. meaning that any disruption affects millions of jobs and countless supply chains. For example, the automotive sector, where components cross the border multiple times, faces major uncertainty. According to industry sources, tariffs could potentially raise the cost of manufacturing a new vehicle by as much as $6.250, with auto-related imports totaling around $225 billion. In addition, U.S. companies rely heavily on Canadian steel and aluminum. In 2023, the U.S. imported 5.46 million metric tons of aluminum, with Canada supplying 56% of that. Analysts predict that if tariffs force U.S. buyers to seek alternative sources, premiums on metals in the U.S. Midwest could spike from 28 cents to 50 cents per pound or more. Immediate and long-term economic impacts. The broader economic impact of tariffs is staggering. Market analysts from PwC have warned that, if implemented, Trump's tariffs could raise annual costs on U.S. imports from Canada from $440 million to $107 billion and on Mexican imports from $1.3 billion to $132 billion. Moreover, according to a Budget Lab estimate at Yale University, American households might lose over $1.200 a year in purchasing power due to these tariff-induced price hikes. U.S. trade policies have broader implications. 2. The U.S. goods and services deficit increased by 17% in 2024 to a record $918.4 billion. While trade statistics show that while Canada's exports to the U.S. grew by 4.9% in December 2024, its imports grew only 2.3%, helping Canada post its first trade surplus in 10 months of $708 million. For the average consumer on both sides of the border, the trade war brings direct consequences. Price increases. Tariffs can translate into higher prices on everyday items such as groceries, automobiles, and household goods. In the U.S., rising costs could lead to an estimated increase of up to 50 cents per gallon in gasoline prices in certain regions. Job uncertainty. As manufacturers face higher production costs, companies might cut jobs or even relocate operations. In Canada, nearly 2.4 million jobs depend on U.S. trade, and economists warn that even a small shift could result in significant layoffs. Supply chain disruptions. Industries ranging from automotive to electronics might experience delays and increased costs as companies scramble to reconfigure their supply chains. This uncertainty means that products once taken for granted may become scarcer or more expensive. These statistics underscore the immense risks involved, not just for governments negotiating trade deals but for every individual who fills up their car or shops for groceries. Section 3. The bigger picture and what's next. A shift towards self-sustainability and economic independence. At its core, this trade conflict is sparking a broader conversation about economic independence and self-sustainability. Canadians are increasingly questioning their reliance on American markets, with a recent Angus Reid poll showing that 91% of Canadians want to reduce this dependency. This movement isn't a temporary reaction, it's a call for long-term change. Many believe that by bolstering local industries, Canada could not only weather the current trade storm but also strengthen its economy in the coming decades. Government initiatives are already underway. For instance, the Canadian government has allocated $1.3 billion for enhanced border security measures and investments in supply chain diversification. Additionally, the USMCA, which governs trade between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, now faces renewed scrutiny, with both Canada and Mexico prepared to retaliate with their own tariffs, potentially reaching up to 25% on U.S. goods in targeted sectors. Global repercussions and future trade scenarios. The tariff war isn't limited to bilateral relations, it has global ripple effects. Analysts at the Peterson Institute and the Brookings Institution warn that tariffs could disrupt global supply chains. For example, U.S. steel and aluminum buyers might shift to suppliers in the Middle East, India, Chile, or Peru, as reported by Reuters. Moreover, the U.S. trade deficit has broader implications. The U.S. goods and services deficit in 2024 reached $918.4 billion, with the U.S. running surpluses with only a few countries like Canada when oil and gas are excluded. Meanwhile, the U.S. deficit with China, though reduced from record highs, still stood at $295 billion in 2024. In North America, the integration of economies is profound. For example, trade between Canada and the US supports more than 2.4 million Canadian jobs and accounts for nearly 18% of Canadian GDP. On the US side, 34 states count Canada as their top export market, with daily trade flows estimated at $3.6 billion. These figures highlight how a disruption, whether from tariffs or retaliatory measures, could have widespread, long-lasting effects. The long road ahead, potential outcomes and strategic shifts. Looking ahead, there are a few scenarios on the table. Economists estimate that if the trade war escalates and full-scale 25% tariffs are imposed, with reciprocal measures from Canada and Mexico, Canada's GDP could fall by around 2.5% by early 2026, while unemployment might rise sharply. Additionally, the Bank of Canada has modeled scenarios in which prolonged trade conflicts would increase inflation to over 7.2% by mid-2025, a significant jump from current levels. On the US side, tariffs might eventually reduce the trade deficit with China and Mexico, but at a steep cost to American consumers. For instance, a study by the Tax Foundation projects that these tariffs could add as much as $1.2 trillion in tax revenue over a decade. But American households could end up paying thousands of dollars more per year for imported goods. For everyday Canadians and Americans alike, the long-term consequences of this trade war could be profound. Economic uncertainty. As trade policies shift, businesses might delay investments or cut jobs, leading to a less predictable economic environment. Canadian manufacturers, for example, are already bracing for a potential downturn that could threaten thousands of jobs. Consumer prices. Expect to see higher prices on everyday items, from food and gasoline to electronics and automobiles. U.S. gasoline prices might rise by up to 50 cents per gallon in some regions, while Canadian consumers could face similar hikes in grocery bills. Supply chain reconfiguration. Industries may have to reconfigure their supply chains, potentially leading to temporary shortages or delays. This could mean longer wait times for everything from cars to smartphones. Shifts in trade patterns. With global supply chains in flux, you might start noticing that goods once imported from Canada or Mexico are now sourced from entirely different regions, such as the Middle East or South America. This rebalancing could have lasting effects on local industries and job markets. Ultimately, this trade conflict is more than just a policy dispute. It's a pivotal moment that could reshape North American economies for years to come. The Buy Canadian movement, the evolving retaliatory tariffs, and the potential shifts in global trade all point to a future where economic independence and strategic realignment become the new normal. In conclusion, the trade war between the US and Canada, and by extension Mexico, is far from a distant political debate. It is already changing the way Canadians shop, affecting millions of jobs and sending ripples through global supply chains. With the US running a trade deficit of nearly $918.4 billion in 2024, and Canada's deep economic ties with the US accounting for over 75% of its exports, the stakes are incredibly high. Economists warn that if these tariffs escalate, American consumers could lose over $1.200 per household annually in purchasing power, while Canadian GDP might shrink by 2.5% and inflation could soar above 7%. So, what do you think? Is the Buy Canadian movement here to stay, or will the trade winds eventually shift back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's discuss how these massive numbers and policy decisions might impact your daily life.
Canada's economic strategy is shifting into overdrive. What started as a response to U.S. trade pressures was intended to force Canada into submission, a full-throttle drive for economic independence. Could Canada be setting itself up to break free from the U.S. economic dominance and create a future all on its own? These transformative changes are becoming a reality as Canada invests over $187 billion in infrastructure through the Investing in Canada plan, aiming to enhance public transit, green energy, and trade corridors nationwide. Canada's economic future is changing rapidly. A combination of political strategies, bold infrastructure projects, and a focus on sustainability is positioning the country to become a key player in global trade. The recent trade war with the U.S. turned out to be the catalyst that Canada needed. So let's take a closer look at these seismic shifts, the major developments that are steering Canada's future. Chapter 1. The U.S. Trade strategy that backfired in 2018. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, as well as other critical exports. The move was intended to force Canada into submission, weakening its economic reliance on the U.S. But instead, it sparked a shift in Canada's approach. In fact, the Canadian government took a strong stand, using these tariffs as a wake-up call to accelerate its own plans for economic self-sufficiency. Canada had long relied on the U.S. as its primary trading partner, with around 75% of Canadian exports heading south. But these tariffs exposed the vulnerabilities in this trade dependency. In response, Canada didn't back down. It struck hard, planning 18 critical infrastructure projects to diversify and strengthen its economy. British Columbia alone has fast-tracked 18 major projects, focusing on key industries like mining, energy, and logistics. For example, the $1.5 billion expansion of the Port of Vancouver is designed to significantly increase Canada's export capacity, reducing its dependence on U.S. infrastructure. And it's not just British Columbia. Projects across the country are being fast-tracked to make Canada more resilient in the face of these new economic challenges. Canada has now set its sights on not just surviving the tariffs, but thriving beyond the U.S. market. By reinvesting in its infrastructure and diversifying its trade partnerships, Canada is rewriting the economic rulebook, not just adapting to changes, but taking the lead. Canada's investments in critical infrastructure, including a fast-tracked 18 major projects, will create tens of thousands of jobs. For example, British Columbia's commitment to developing 18 key infrastructure projects is expected to generate over $10 billion in economic activity. Chapter 2. The Pipeline Overhaul. Bypassing the U.S. Canada's oil and gas industry has long been intertwined with the U.S. economy. Historically, most of Canada's crude oil was exported to the U.S. for refining, but now, Canada is taking bold steps to break free from this dependency. Several major pipeline projects, including the Trans Mountain Expansion Project, are being fast-tracked to ensure that Canada's energy resources can stay within its borders, serving its own refineries and reaching new markets. By keeping this valuable resource within the country, Canada is positioning itself as a leader in North American energy production. But it's not just oil and gas. Canada's government is also making significant investments in renewable energy projects. Over the last 5 years, Canada's solar energy capacity has grown by 92%, and wind energy projects are surging as well. BC Canada's current official targets focus on achieving a 40-45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 levels by 2030 and reaching net zero emissions by 2050. Through these combined efforts, the overhaul of its energy pipelines and rapid expansion of renewable energy sources, Canada is not only future-proofing its energy sector, but also reducing its dependence on U.S. refineries, making its energy industry more resilient and sustainable. The overhaul of Canada's energy infrastructure, including new east-west pipeline projects, means less reliance on U.S. refineries and more control over energy pricing. Canada's oil industry, which produced approximately 5.6 million barrels per day in 2023 according to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, could see a reduction in export costs, potentially stabilizing gas prices domestically. Some analysts predict this could lower prices at the pump by up to 5-10% over the next 5 years, depending on global oil price fluctuations. Chapter 3. The Mining Expansion, Canada's Big Power Play. With the global shift toward electric vehicles (EVs), demand for critical minerals is skyrocketing. Lithium, copper, and rare earth elements are essential for manufacturing EV batteries and other clean tech, and currently, China dominates the global supply chain. But Canada is stepping in to change the game. Canada is home to vast mineral reserves, and the country is fast-tracking mining projects to tap into them. The country's northern regions, particularly in Quebec and Ontario, are already home to rich deposits of these essential minerals. In fact, Canada ranks among the top 10 global producers of lithium and nickel, two key minerals in the EV supply chain. Canada is positioning itself to become a key global supplier of materials necessary for the clean energy revolution. The country is already in discussions with major tech companies and electric vehicle manufacturers to supply these minerals, creating opportunities for new trade partnerships beyond the U.S. This move could significantly reduce Canada's reliance on foreign suppliers and allow it to capture a larger share of the global clean tech market. If successful, this strategy would place Canada in the driver's seat of the global clean tech industry. With the world's push towards electric vehicles and sustainable technologies, Canada is set to become a critical player in this multi-billion-dollar sector. In 2025, Canada is set to invest $6.15 billion in new mining projects. This will create jobs in key resource areas, particularly in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. For Canadians in rural mining communities, the influx of investment could mean higher wages and more job opportunities. Additionally, regions like Northern Ontario, which rely on mining for economic activity, could see a 10% increase in local economic growth, which would contribute to improved infrastructure and more community programs. Chapter 4: Ports and Logistics. The silent game changer. Canada's ports are quietly undergoing a transformation. With massive investments being made in port capacity and shore power technology, Canada is positioning its ports to play a pivotal role in reshaping global trade. The Port of Vancouver, for example, is undergoing a $3.5 billion expansion project that will allow it to increase the port's container capacity by 2.4 million 20-foot equivalent units TEUs annually, representing a 50% boost. One of the most innovative moves is the introduction of shore power technology. This allows cargo ships to plug into the power grid while docked, reducing emissions and lowering operating costs for shipping companies. With growing concerns about the environmental impact of shipping, this technology positions Canadian ports as a more sustainable and cost-effective option for international trade. Ports like Vancouver and Prince Rupert are expanding their capacity to accommodate the growing demand for goods movement. These expansions, combined with improved logistics systems, will help reduce Canada's reliance on U.S. shipping infrastructure and position Canada as a key player in the global supply chain. By focusing on port expansion and improving logistics, Canada is setting the stage for a new era of international trade, one where it has more control and leverage over its global partnerships. Canada's ongoing expansion of its ports is a critical development, with Vancouver's port seeing $3.5 billion in expansion investments. These investments will result in faster processing of goods and more competitive shipping routes. As a result, Canadian consumers will experience a reduction in the cost of imported goods. According to the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, this could lead to a reduction in shipping costs for both consumers and businesses over the next few years. Chapter 5: Green Energy, Canada's long-term power play. In the past 5 years alone, Canada has increased its solar energy capacity by 92%, and now over 96,000 solar installations are in place across the country. With ambitious goals for the future, Canada plans to increase its renewable energy share to 30% by 2025. The country is also ramping up investments in wind and hydroelectric energy, targeting a greener, more diversified energy grid. As nations around the world seek sustainable energy solutions, Canada is positioning itself as a global leader in clean energy. The country is already one of the largest producers of hydroelectric power globally, and the recent surge in solar and wind energy positions Canada to meet the growing demand for clean energy, especially from Europe and Asia. This green energy shift isn't just about reducing emissions, it's about economic resilience. By investing in renewable energy, Canada is insulating itself from the volatility of oil price fluctuations and ensuring that its energy sector is not reliant on global fossil fuel markets. As Canada invests heavily in renewable energy, Canada's broader energy goals include generating 90% of its electricity from non-emitting sources by 2030. This transition to cleaner energy sources will lower the volatility of energy prices, particularly in the winter months when heating costs spike. For consumers, this could translate into a 15–20% reduction in monthly energy bills, especially for households in rural areas that have higher energy demands. Chapter 6: Infrastructure Overhaul, Building the New Backbone. To support its growing economy, Canada is undergoing an extensive infrastructure overhaul. Since 2017, the Canadian government has allocated over $4.1 billion to enhance transportation networks, including roads, railways, airports, and marine shipping lanes. The federal government is investing in our supply chains, making them more resilient and competitive for long-term economic growth. These projects from the announcement today will strengthen our railway system, diversify the local economy, and eliminate more barriers to internal trade among provinces and territories. Wilson Miao, Member of Parliament Richmond Centre. This modernization is critical for improving trade efficiency both within Canada and with international partners. One standout project in this infrastructure renaissance is the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which is set to open in 2025. This bridge will directly link Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario, facilitating uninterrupted freeway traffic and strengthening cross-border trade between Canada and the US. The bridge will also reduce congestion at the existing Ambassador Bridge, which handles $200 billion worth of trade annually. The infrastructure upgrades aren't just for international trade, they're also designed to improve domestic connectivity. Faster and more reliable transportation routes will reduce logistical bottlenecks and lower transportation costs, creating a more competitive environment for Canadian businesses. The expansion of digital networks is also set to enhance Canada's connectivity, making it easier for businesses to engage in e-commerce and access global markets. By 2025, projections suggest that Canada's infrastructure investments will surpass CAD $300 billion. This massive investment will lay the foundation for Canada to become a central hub for international commerce, with faster trade routes and modernized infrastructure positioning the nation as a key player in the global supply chain. With improved infrastructure, faster processing times at ports, and more efficient transport networks will allow goods to move more swiftly and at lower costs. This will benefit Canadian consumers through faster delivery times on a variety of products, from groceries to high-tech gadgets, which could result in lower retail prices and greater availability of goods. Chapter 7. Diversifying trade beyond the U.S. Perhaps the most transformative shift is Canada's assertive move to broaden its trade horizons. Historically, the U.S. has been Canada's largest trading partner, but now Canada is looking to diversify its trade relationships. The goal is to reduce its over-reliance on the U.S. market and mitigate risks associated with trade fluctuations or geopolitical tensions. Canada is actively working to secure trade agreements with Europe, Asia, and emerging markets. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP), which Canada joined in 2018, is a key part of this strategy. The agreement opens up trade with countries like Japan, Australia, and Vietnam, significantly boosting Canada's exports in energy, agriculture, and technology. One of Canada's most significant new ventures is its push into the liquefied natural gas (LNG) market. The country's first LNG project, backed by Shell, is expected to commence exports to Asia in 2025. This will open new markets for Canada's natural gas and reduce its dependence on U.S. trade routes, diversifying the country's energy exports to new and rapidly growing markets in Asia. Through these strategic moves, Canada is setting itself up as a global trade leader, not just a supplier to the U.S. By broadening its trade relationships and securing access to alternative markets, Canada is not only strengthening its own economic independence, but also increasing its influence in global economic negotiations. To recap, Canada's economic transformation is marked by 7 major shifts responding to U.S. tariffs with bold infrastructure investments, overhauling its energy sector to reduce dependency on the U.S., expanding its mining sector to capitalize on the electric vehicle boom, revamping ports and logistics, accelerating its green energy sector, modernizing infrastructure, and diversifying its trade relationships beyond the U.S. Each of these shifts is designed to make Canada more resilient, self-reliant, and competitive on the global stage. What do you think? Is Canada on the path to economic independence, or are these plans reaching beyond their grasp? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
How would a sudden $5,000 increase on your next car purchase affect your budget? This isn't a distant possibility. It's a looming reality as trade tensions escalate between the U.S. and its closest neighbors. Today, we're delving into a critical issue that could significantly impact your wallet: the potential rise in car prices due to new tariffs on automotive imports. President Trump's recent announcement of a 25% tariff on vehicles and parts imported from Canada and Mexico has sent shockwaves through the automotive industry. Analysts predict that this could add approximately $3,000 to the cost of a new vehicle, with some estimates reaching up to $5,000. Chapter 1. The U.S.-Canada Trade Conflict. For years, Canada and the U.S. have shared one of the closest and most integrated trade relationships in the world. In fact, the U.S. is Canada's largest trading partner, accounting for over 75% of its total exports. The total value of trade between the two nations reached $1 trillion USD in 2024. with over $300 billion USD worth of cars and automotive parts alone crossing the border each year. However, things took a dramatic turn in recent years, particularly under President Trump's administration. Trump's protectionist policies, coupled with his America First trade agenda, have placed enormous pressure on Canada, which had long relied on the US as its largest trading partner. Trump's tariffs, particularly on steel and aluminum, were a direct hit to Canada's economy, with a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum. In addition, Trump's threats to impose tariffs of up to 100% on Canadian vehicles and metals have raised alarms in Ottawa. Trump stated, "If we don't make a deal with Canada, we're going to put a big tariff on cars. Could be a 50 or 100% because we don't want their cars. We want to make the cars in Detroit." The idea of slapping such steep tariffs on a product like automobiles, Canada's third largest export to the US, is a game changer. Canada's auto sector is an $18 billion USD industry, with approximately 120,000 Canadians employed in this sector. Now, how does this all trickle down to the average person? Well, let's think about the cars you drive and the prices you pay. If these tariffs go through, you could see the price of a new car rise by thousands of dollars. For example, a mid-range sedan could see a price hike of up to $5,000 or more due to the increased cost of importing parts and vehicles. This means higher car payments, especially for families who rely on affordable vehicles for work or daily use. And for many, especially those in Canada and the US, with a long history of cross-border trade, this could mean higher prices at the dealership, longer wait times for new vehicles, and potential job losses in factories on both sides of the border. Chapter 2. Canada's response and the Tesla target. In response to these growing threats, Canadian officials have made it clear, if you pick a fight with us, we're going to fight back, and they have a strong tool at their disposal. One of the most striking moves Canada has proposed is a 100% tariff on American-made electric vehicles, particularly Tesla. Why Tesla? Because it's more than just a car. Tesla has become a symbol of American innovation and is closely associated with President Trump's vision of American technological supremacy. Tesla represents the pinnacle of American-made electric vehicles, and any move against Tesla would be a direct attack on the American EV sector. Tesla's market cap stands at around $1.08 billion USD, and it's seen as the world leader in electric vehicles. Tesla's annual production of electric vehicles exceeds 1.3 million cars, with a significant portion of those cars, around 45,000, in 2022 being sold to Canadian consumers. But targeting Tesla isn't just symbolic, it's strategic. Tesla has a significant market share in Canada, where electric vehicles now account for approximately 13.4% of total car sales. Any move that threatens its presence would send shockwaves through the US domestic political landscape. After all, Tesla has strong political backers, including notable figures in Washington who have supported the company's expansion. A sudden 100% tariff on all Teslas in Canada could raise the price of the electric vehicles by tens of thousands of dollars, slowing sales and perhaps even forcing Tesla to rethink its strategy in North America. Tesla owners and fans, especially those in Canada, should be concerned. A 100% tariff on American-made Teslas would drive up the cost of these electric vehicles to such an extent that it could make them unaffordable for most consumers. For anyone planning to buy a new Tesla, expect steep price hikes, or worse, fewer models available. The average price of a Tesla Model 3 in Canada could rise from $56,000 CAD to upwards of $112 CAD, making it a luxury item instead of an accessible EV alternative. This could push buyers back into the arms of more conventional, gas-powered cars, which would not only slow the shift toward clean energy, but also limit consumer choice in the long term. Chapter 3. The European Union's role now. Let's turn our attention to Europe. As the US imposes tariffs, Canada has opened the door to a new trade relationship with the European Union. But what does this really mean? The EU, with its 27 member states and population of nearly 450 million people, represents a significant alternative to the US market. In fact, Europe is Canada's third largest trading partner, with total trade valued at $56 billion USD in 2020. This represents a 8.2% share of Canada's total exports, and that share is only expected to grow as Canada seeks to diversify its economic base. In fact, Canada and the European Union already have a comprehensive trade agreement in place, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA. This agreement, which came into effect in 2017, eliminates most tariffs between Canada and the EU, offering Canadian industries access to European markets without the same restrictions they face with the US. This is a crucial development, especially in the face of increasing US protectionism. However, while the EU may provide a promising alternative, the logistics are far from simple. The EU is geographically distant, and the transportation costs to move goods across the Atlantic are considerably higher than sending them across the US-Canada border. These costs, combined with differing regulations and standards between the two regions, pose challenges to a full trade pivot. Yet, even with these challenges, Canada's metal exports, particularly nickel, cobalt, and lithium, have found a ready market in Europe. The EU is investing heavily in the electric vehicle revolution, and Canada's abundant resources are a perfect match. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, the demand for these critical minerals is projected to increase by 400% in the next decade, and Canada stands ready to supply these essential materials. Chapter 4. The economic consequences of the trade war. To understand the full scope of the potential economic fallout, we need to look at the industries most affected by these tariffs. While trade tensions between the US and Canada primarily focus on automobiles, steel, and aluminum, the ripple effects could extend into everyday goods. Let's take a closer look at the US automotive sector. According to the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, in 2022, the US auto industry accounted for $96.6 billion USD in exports. Canada alone imports about $53 billion USD worth of US-made vehicles annually, and more than 100,000 jobs in Canada rely directly on the automobile trade between these two nations. However, the US auto industry is not just at risk of losing Canadian customers. If tariffs are slapped on Canadian-made vehicles, US manufacturers that rely on Canadian parts would face disruptions to their production lines, as many key components such as automotive steel, aluminum, and electronic parts are sourced from Canada. A steep 100% tariff could cause a $2,000, $3,000 USD increase in the price of a vehicle produced in the US, further squeezing consumers already facing inflation and supply chain disruptions. But it's not just about car prices. The livelihoods of workers in both Canada and the US are on the line. The US auto sector is already facing a shortage of skilled labor, and a trade war could exacerbate job losses. In 2023, around 1.1 million US workers were employed in automobile manufacturing, and the auto parts sector employed an additional 400,000 workers. A significant drop in production due to tariffs could result in layoffs and factory closures in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, which rely heavily on automotive manufacturing. All of this may seem abstract, but the reality is very much tangible. For average consumers, the day-to-day impact could be felt in their wallets. If car prices increase by thousands of dollars, many families could be priced out of buying new cars or be forced to hold on to their old ones longer than anticipated. This will raise the cost of ownership. Over time, higher maintenance costs, higher insurance premiums, and fuel costs for older models. So, will Canada abandon the US and turn fully toward Europe? Or is this just a strategic bluff to gain leverage? The answer likely lies somewhere in between. While Canada is certainly making a strong statement by signaling a potential shift toward Europe, it's clear that the US market is still too important to walk away from entirely. With a $1.4 trillion USD trade relationship and over 75% of Canadian exports going to the US, the costs of abandoning that market would be catastrophic. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think Canada's trade future will unfold? Will Europe be the answer, or is this just a strategic move to gain bargaining power?
Analysts predict that if tariffs force US buyers to seek alternative sources, premiums on metals in the US Midwest could spike from 28 cents to 50 cents per pound or more. Immediate and long-term economic impacts. The broader economic impact of tariffs is staggering. Market analysts from PwC have warned that, if implemented, Trump's tariffs could raise annual costs on US imports from Canada from $440 million to $107 billion and on Mexican imports from $1.3 billion to $132 billion. Moreover, According to a Budget Lab estimate at Yale University, American households might lose over $1.200 a year in purchasing power due to these tariff-induced price hikes. U.S. trade policies have broader implications. 2. The U.S. goods and services deficit increased by 17% in 2024 to a record $918.4 billion. While trade statistics show that while Canada's exports to the U.S. grew by 4.9% in December 2024, its imports grew only 2.3%, helping Canada post its first trade surplus in 10 months of $708 million. For the average consumer on both sides of the border, the trade war brings direct consequences. Price increases. Tariffs can translate into higher prices on everyday items such as groceries, automobiles, and household goods. In the U.S., rising costs could lead to an estimated increase of up to 50 cents per gallon in gasoline prices in certain regions. Job uncertainty. As manufacturers face higher production costs, companies might cut jobs or even relocate operations. In Canada, nearly 2.4 million jobs depend on U.S. trade, and economists warn that even a small shift could result in significant layoffs. Supply chain disruptions. Industries ranging from automotive to electronics might experience delays and increased costs as companies scramble to reconfigure their supply chains. This uncertainty means that products once taken for granted may become scarcer or more expensive. These statistics underscore the immense risks involved, not just for governments negotiating trade deals but for every individual who fills up their car or shops for groceries. Section 3. The bigger picture and what's next. A shift towards self-sustainability and economic independence. At its core, this trade conflict is sparking a broader conversation about economic independence and self-sustainability. Canadians are increasingly questioning their reliance on American markets, with a recent Angus Reid poll showing that 91% of Canadians want to reduce this dependency. This movement isn't a temporary reaction, it's a call for long-term change. Many believe that by bolstering local industries, Canada could not only weather the current trade storm but also strengthen its economy in the coming decades. Government initiatives are already underway. For instance, the Canadian government has allocated $1.3 billion for enhanced border